Okay, now I'm on the live screen. So yeah, I got a lot of positive feedback for that article, or not the article, but the interview I did last week, which served as episode 24, even though it wasn't live. That I did with Wendy Muse, and we talked about Brazil and a lot of the things that were going on to people of color in Brazil and the assault on democracy in that country and how people are under attack and living under what looks to be the formation of another dictatorship. And I hope that doesn't happen, but there are a lot of very troubling things going on in Brazil. So if you want to know what's going on in that country, definitely check out that interview that I did last week. And I'm going to be doing more interviews because I realize that it's not something that I do enough. And there are a lot of benefits to actually breaking bread with people who are knowledgeable of certain issues and certain topics, especially if they've been covering those topics for longer than you have. It doesn't mean that you can't do research yourself about certain issues, but talking to yourself all the time, on your shows is only goes but so far. So I'm going to be doing interviews a lot more in the future. Definitely be on the lookout for that. And I'm going to cover a lot of topics. There's no limit in terms of the things that I want to talk about. But I want to get into the point of today's show. And definitely like this video. If you're listening on Twitter, I don't live stream on Facebook. So people on Facebook probably aren't hearing me right now. But if you're definitely listening on Twitter, definitely like it and retweet it so everyone knows that I'm live. And I want to talk about a couple things today. It's going to be, for the most part, I'm going to try to keep it short. I'm going to try to keep today's show under an hour, or at least around an hour. I want to talk about the Starbucks incident, which happened about 10 days ago. I want to say it happened on the 12th. So basically a week and a half. And I didn't get a chance to talk about it last week because, like I said, I was doing an interview. And I had to edit that interview and everything like that. So I was just really busy last Sunday and I didn't really get a chance to talk about it. So I'm talking about it today. And I'm not going to rehash the timeline of everything that happened because honestly, a lot of you guys have been keeping up with this story. So I'm going to assume most people are pretty aware of what happened, unless you're listening to this video a year from now or something like that. So in that case, you probably don't know. But I'm gonna touch on the Starbucks incident, but then I'm also gonna touch on a very disturbing trend that I'm seeing. Um, Hold on, I'm looking at something right now, making sure everything is looking good. Yeah, if you guys can hear me clearly, you or if you can't hear me clearly, make sure you make me aware of that so I can try to change my settings in the background. But a very disturbing trend that I'm seeing among a lot of center left. At this point, I really don't even want to call them liberal. I don't really know how liberal they are, to be perfectly honest with you. But these center left platforms, these center left outlets that are pushing Russia phobia and the Russia narrative, in my opinion, a little too hard. And they're doing it at the a slight of black activists, specifically a friend of mine named Noah Changa Noah Changa, and they're doing it at the slight of black activists such as her, um, to create this impression that people are unwilling or willing participants in some sort of Russia game where the Russian government is trying to manipulate, black activists here in America to push some sort of Kremlin agenda. It's very salacious. It's very clickbaity. It's very weak journalism. Okay, and I'm definitely gonna get into that story and get into why that's a problem. And that's gonna be probably the last thing I touch on though, because like I said, I'm gonna touch on a couple topics today, and that's gonna be the last topic. But I don't want to get too much into that because I had to stop myself for a second because I was about to go knee deep into that story, and I want to go in order of my notes. So let's start out with what happened at Starbucks. So a lot of you guys have heard the story already. It involved two black men, all right, Rashawn Nelson and Dante Robinson. And I'm going to give like a brief summation of what happened just for the sake of discussion. They walked into a Starbucks cafe and they were waiting for a potential business partner. Okay, so they were there to talk real estate with a potential, business partner. I guess they were trying to break bread with this. It seems like it was a white guy they were trying to break bread with. And they were just sitting there waiting for him, because they showed up ahead of time. And to make a long story short, the manager ended up calling the police on them after they had only been there for a couple minutes. Now, they weren't paying customers, okay, but something that a lot of people have brought up is that, you get a lot of people who go into Starbucks purely just to use their Wi-Fi. Everybody doesn't go into Starbucks to purchase something, but they had one of them had tried to gain entry into, I want to say it was one of the restrooms, and that's when the manager became aware of them and ended up calling the police on them. And it's really, at this point, it's still unclear as to what the manager's reason for calling the police on them were. Okay, we know, it definitely appears that the reasoning behind the police engagement was almost certainly because we're dealing with two black men in what appears to be an affluent area, an affluent neighborhood, an affluent part of the city. Okay, and they were victims of racial targeting. Okay, that's how this story is being interpreted. And apparently, if you read reports, okay, there are former employees of this particular Starbucks who have come out and stated that this particular manager had a history of targeting black people and black patrons and not promoting black employees and things like that. So it's a lot of hearsay, to be perfectly honest with you. But I think the most important thing about this story, okay, is not even Starbucks itself. Okay, because Starbucks. This isn't the first incident that Starbucks has had where there's been some racial animus that's cropped to the surface. So you guys might remember back in 2015, Starbucks began a short-lived campaign that became really criticized. The name of the campaign was called Race Together. And you guys might remember they were taking like cups of the patrons and they were writing like Race Together, basically, were being written on the cups by the baristas. And people criticized this and people turned it into memes, and it didn't really work out in Starbucks' favor. So that's why I said it was short lived, because they kind of stopped it. So, and that was because of another incident involving a man named Dontre Hamilton. Okay, around a year earlier, in 2014, and a Starbucks employee, a very similar incident to what happened 10 days ago, and I want to say it was in Philadelphia. In 2014, 4 years ago, Dontre Hamilton had a Starbucks employee call the police on him. The police showed up and killed him. Okay, and there were a number of protests and a public outcry around what happened to Dontre Hamilton in 2014. So it seems like a year later, that sort of inspired them to go on this public awareness campaign. Race together. We're gonna solve the problem of race by writing something on your cup. So you, as you drink your latte, whatever it is that you're drinking, you're thinking about the relationship between black people and white people, because we're writing race together on the cups. It was honestly, it was. I mean, the sentiment I think was genuine. I don't want to criticize them too much. I think the sentiment was genuine, but stuff like this has no effect. Okay, and it leads into, this is a great way to segue into why I wanted to talk about this in the first place, because fast forward 4 years later, in 2018, 10 days ago, you have a similar incident. Now, thankfully, the two brothers in this case weren't assaulted, and they weren't shot and killed like Dontre Hamilton. But they did spend 8 or 9 hours in a Philadelphia jail cell for no other reason than being two black men sitting for a couple of minutes in a public establishment. All right, and they were later released because the prosecutor was like, what am I supposed to charge these guys with? I'm not going to charge them with anything. So they were released, but that doesn't mean that, I don't know what's going on with this business deal, that deal that they were on, that might have fallen through because of this altercation. So these guys might be losing out on some money. Obviously, they're now being pushed into the spotlight because of this incident. So this stuff causes trauma, and something that needs to be addressed and really talked about is how people, specifically white people, and at times even non-white people, other groups of people, black people, Asians, whoever the case may be, people call the police on black people as a way of controlling our population. And this has been going on for a very long time. That's why I said this kind of goes beyond Starbucks. I'm in the middle of writing an article. It's just about done. Unfortunately, I wasn't able to get the article up and running before I went live today, or not up and running, but posted on to my blog, Black and Intellectual. And the title of the article is going to be 6 Reasons Why Racial Bias Training Won't Stop Racial Targeting. Okay? And I want to go over briefly a few things that I'm writing about in that article, because it directly addresses the notion that the Starbucks CEO is trying to put out there, that because on the 29th, let me back up. On the 29th, Starbucks is closing thousands of stores, around the country to observe this day of racial training, where they're going to be talking about racial bias and things like that. And a lot of people have criticized this. A lot of people have criticized this, rightfully so, because a lot of people are like, what is this? What is this really going to achieve? I think that's a legitimate question to ask. And me personally, I don't think it's really going to achieve anything. Okay, because there are 6 critical things that Starbucks is missing. Okay, one of the things that Starbucks is missing, the Starbucks CEO, one of the critical things is that, like I said already, the problem is bigger than Starbucks. Racism within restaurants, bars, cafes has been going on, honestly, as long as America has been a nation. There are constantly, you see stories cropping up, in the media of, these racist engagements and these racist attacks where you have white patrons being racist towards black patrons in a restaurant or in some bar, or you have some sort of racist waiter or racist manager writing the N word on a receipt, or it could be an employee. So it could be a black employee of a restaurant or a cafe or a pub or whatever the case may be, and the black employee is waiting on some white patrons, and the white patrons do something dirty, writing the N word on the receipt, and that stuff happens. Honestly, that stuff happens every day. Okay, it's just that we only hear about certain stories from time to time, but that stuff happens on a consistent basis. Okay, so this is not just about Starbucks, and that's kind of what I think people should understand. I think this is kind of just happening in Starbucks, and Starbucks has, honestly, unfortunately, a history of sort of these racialized incidents occurring on their premises. Okay, but I'm not going to say that that's necessarily being condoned by Starbucks as a company. I do think that there's a line that has to be drawn between Starbucks as a company and some of the people that they employ. Now, there are articles that have been written and that have brought up how Starbucks and Whole Foods and some of these other institutions are signs of gentrification, and how your neighborhood is being gentrified when you see a Starbucks coming around. Again, I don't know how true that is. There's a local Starbucks in my area, and it's not necessarily in a affluent part of town. So, I mean, it's, I just think that we have to look at this problem, this issue of racism within establishments, within, restaurants and bars, as a reflection of America as a society. These are societal issues that must be addressed. Okay, and I don't think the reason why I'm bringing it up in the point of with regards to this article is because I don't think racial bias training is going to address that whatsoever. I don't think that's going to. I don't. If Starbucks really wanted to do something, and I'm going to get to this later on, if Starbucks really wanted to be transformative, they would get together with other corporations and they would look at ways to address systemic problems within restaurants and within eateries and establishments and things like that collectively. Okay, in terms of the type of people that they are employing and things like that. But I want to touch on that later on. So number 2, okay, the second thing that I want to touch on that's very important is that all bias is not unconscious. Okay, so one of the reactions that I've heard and come across regarding this whole Starbucks situation is the notion of implicit bias. Okay, which refers to the belief that stereotypes that one holds are unconscious. Like, people are unaware of these biases that they hold. So people are not conscious of their racism. Their racism is subconscious and unconscious. Okay, and while there might be some credibility to that in certain situations, I definitely don't think that is universal. And a lot of people's biases are not unconscious. A lot of people's biases are very conscious. And people are very much aware, a lot of people are very much aware of the racial biases that they have against about black people. Like, so I don't think that everybody is, unconsciously aware of the fact that they are calling the police on black people, knowing damn well they wouldn't call the police on white patrons. I don't think people are unconsciously, I don't think everybody is unconsciously aware of what they're doing. That's what I'm trying to say. And I think when you look at the reaction from the Starbucks CEO, it seems like the de facto perception within, not just the Starbucks CEO, but within a lot of people within society is that, we can solve this problem simply by addressing implicit bias or implicit bias or implicit racism. And I don't think that's going to really address the issue at all, to be perfectly honest with you. Okay, so something that's also needs to be addressed when it comes to the Starbucks incident is the fact that what we're really talking about is we're talking about how people within society, specifically white people in positions of power, like a manager, for instance, assume the worst in black people and how that is at the heart of racial targeting. Okay, so you see a couple of black men sitting down, minding their own business, and your gut reaction is to think to yourself, okay, they must be up to no good. I need to get them out of my business. I need to get them, and it's not even the manager. It's not even that person's business. Okay, they're just managing that particular location. But I need to for the sake of my white patrons, I need to get them out of here as quickly as possible. And I don't want to address them directly because I don't really have any reason to kick them out of I don't have any reason to kick them out of Starbucks. So I'm just going to call the police. I'm going to call the police and let the police handle it because the police are an excellent tool of population control against the black community. You people might think I'm reading too much into it, but no, this is an analysis. This is in many ways a psychoanalysis of the logic that has to go through people's minds. I mean, there are only but so many ways that people are thinking about when they call the police on two black men who have been sitting in your place of work for only a couple minutes, and you're already calling the police on them. The only logical explanation is that you're assuming the worst. You're assuming that they're up to no good. Okay, and the common denominator is that it's two black men. So a one-day course won't change that when an entire generation of these teachable moments has occurred and many people still act on these racial impulses. Okay? You have to be honest at some point about the moment we're in and acknowledge that people are choosing to be this way. Okay? People are making conscious decisions. Going back to number 2, all of this stuff is not unconscious. Give me a second to retweet. Actually, I retweeted the wrong thing. Hold on one second. All right, so where was I at? Okay, so yeah, let me continue. So yeah, let me pull up my article. I got sidetracked for one split second. Where am I at? Okay, there we go. So then, another thing that I want to bring up that I was just thinking about, as I was thinking about this story and some of the fallout over this story, I just kept thinking about how police, as I've mentioned already, police as a tool historically, police being used as tools of black population control, and that how that goes back to slavery, and how the calling of police in 2018 to deal with black people um, is a reflection of an age-old mechanism, that a lot of white Americans have used against black Americans as a way of showing them as a way of flexing a type of authority, over black people. It doesn't mean that black people can't call the police on white people. Of course, that happens too. I'm not saying otherwise. Okay, but I think in this particular incident at Starbucks, I think there's a lesson to be learned here, because this was completely unjustified. Okay, so this was an unjustified calling of the police, okay, to deal with black people who the manager at the time, the white manager, didn't want to deal with. Okay. And so that's something to think about. I'm not going to go into too much about that in this live stream because I don't want the live stream to drag on for too long, but I will touch on that in the particular article. I think if Starbucks really wanted to send a message, and if Starbucks really wanted to show that they are serious about the race issue, I have one really good idea for something that Starbucks could do. And it doesn't involve racial bias training. Okay, because I don't think you can train your way out of, I don't think a history lesson about the civil rights movement and about the Harlem Renaissance or whatever the case may be, I don't think a history lesson is going to fix this problem. And that's kind of what the Starbucks CEO is kind of suggesting. They're suggesting that, learning what people should already be aware of, okay, through the regular education system in America, and just everything that's been going on, the discussion that's already been going on in this country since the formation of groups like Black Lives Matter, for instance. And this stuff has been in the news for years now. There isn't much more. What I'm trying to say is there isn't much more that needs to be taught that hasn't already been out there in the public sphere. Okay, so one day of racial bias training is not going to change that. But I'll tell you what will. And this is what the Starbucks CEO really should do but won't do. Okay, because it gets at the heart of the problem. If they wanted to really send a message, and I'm not saying this to just to Starbucks, I'm saying this to any of these corporations, all of these corporations, Walmart, all of them. Get behind and support black movements and black activists the same way some of these organizations and some of these corporations got behind the Parkland activists and the Parkland victims. And what I mean by that is show that same level of support financially and publicly. Don't just have your your little one day of action just to show that you're going to make some sort of toothless gesture to the black community. Like, no, get behind something like a federal Truth and Reconciliation Commission. And I'm not just talking about doing it as just some sort of dialogue. No, I'm talking about a Truth and Reconciliation Commission with the agenda and with the intention of fundamentally changing policy in America. The whole point of a Truth Commission is to look at how, in the case of the United States, if it would be done here, how racial policies and racist policies in the past and how assumptions that are baked into laws at the local, state, and federal level, how these assumptions have negatively impacted the black community. And changing those things and correcting those things so that they won't happen in the future. So we're talking about policy. We're talking about laws. That hasn't happened in America. You had the civil rights movement. You've had attempts in the past, a couple of attempts during the Clinton administration at a truth commission. but they didn't really seem to go beyond simple feel good gestures about having a dialogue and having a discussion. There was no political incentive to put any federal or corporate weight behind actually changing policies and changing laws. That's what needs to be done. And if Starbucks was serious, that's what they would do. That would be a radical solution that would go beyond simple, we had this incident at one of our stores in Philadelphia, so we're going to solve this problem by having a racial training session for one day where all of our employees will come into work and watch videos about why I'm getting lost in my words, about why racism is bad and why you shouldn't be racist and why you shouldn't prejudge people. Okay, we're going to teach people about the civil rights movement, which they should already know about because people have been learning about the civil rights movement for decades now. We're going to give them another lesson about the civil rights movement and about incidents in the past involving cops and police and yada. No. We don't need that. We don't need that. Okay, I appreciate the gesture from the Starbucks CEO. I appreciate what he's trying to do here, but we need less toothless measures. I'm getting tongue twisted. Less toothless measures, okay, and more action, more actual federally backed, corporate backed measures. If Starbucks wants to send a message, Starbucks needs to put some paper up. Starbucks needs to put some financial skin in the game. Starbucks needs to financially back. And I know some people don't like this because people don't like corporate America getting involved in black movements. But if they get involved in black movements on our terms, where we're talking about, no, we're using your money to promote a federal Truth and Reconciliation Commission to get actual policies changed in this country, which is a pretty radical solution. And look, I understand that that's not going to happen under this administration. Okay, I don't think that's happening under Trump. I'm thinking 5-10 years into the future here when I'm saying this. Okay, but we honestly need to start having these discussions where we need to have these corporations actually put more skin in the game than just like these solutions that don't actually do anything. So that's really honestly what I wanted to say about the Starbucks situation. I think a lot of people, I'm kind of late to this story, and a lot of people have already touched on some of the more important things in terms of the timeline, and the police department has backtracked. The police department didn't really have the best reaction initially, and they've had to backtrack a lot of the things that they've said or they said. So there's a lot of politicking going on. There's a lot of political posturing on the part of Starbucks and on the part of the Philadelphia Police Department. And I just want to see more concrete measures. That's all. Because I'm kind of getting a little agitated by these incidents cropping up, and we're having these discussions and nothing's being done about it. I'm getting a little agitated by that. And in my opinion, we're past the point of talking. We're past the point of having a discussion. Okay, we're in the moment of action. Okay, and I'm talking about serious action. I'm not talking about training. I'm very critical of training as a solution. If you guys watch some of my previous videos about police, and this isn't really a case of police brutality. This is more racial targeting, but even when we talk about police brutality, I'm very critical of the training solution because I don't think it goes far enough. And so that's the whole point of me talking about this today, because I saw what the Starbucks CEO was throwing out there as a solution. I was like, what? Racial bias training? Okay, I gotta talk about this. So that's my 2 cents about that story. So I want to now talk about the last story of the day, which is something that really makes me feel some type of way. All right, and before I really get into that story, let me share out a few things here. Give me 1 second, family. Okay, so everything's still running smoothly, it looks like. So great, no tech issues today. So something that's really been making me feel some type of way is this story um regarding a smear campaign that's been launched against someone who I consider to be a very close friend and a close ally. Hold on 1 second. I just saw something pop up on my screen. Let me reload this. All right, so yeah, it's still going. Yeah, so a very close friend and someone whose wisdom and whose opinions that I really cherish um, a lot, because she's given me a lot of insight on a lot of different issues, and I've had discussions with Anoa in the past, and I have a problem with how certain platforms and certain outlets are engaging with her activist work, and specifically, I'm talking about a local NPR affiliate in Atlanta, WABE. Okay, so 4 days ago, this local NPR affiliate, ran a story on Anoa, and the story was written by a writer named Johnny Kaufman. All right. Now, right off the bat, we see the usage of clickbait headline to engage in blatant character assassination. And the title, the headline that they decided to run with is Atlanta activist uses Russian backed media to spread message. Um, that's the title of the article. And that's the title that they thought would be uh, accurate. Because when you write a headline, you're writing a headline to relay a certain message. You're relaying the gist of the article that you're writing. Okay, but what you see a lot of times is you see a lot of people engage in clickbait. So in order to get clicks onto their links, into their articles, they put little words and phrases within the headline like Russia-backed media. Okay, creating this impression that Anoa is doing something that's spreading Russian propaganda. That's sort of just the point of why this article is being written. Now, I have my own article. I mean, not my own article. I have my own opinion on what I think the true agenda behind this article is. I'm not really going to go into that because um, I want to talk less about the article itself, okay, and more about this agenda to link black movements to the Russia narrative. And a writer by the name of Carl Gibson wrote an article on gritpost.com that I think really well summed up the gist of this article by Kaufman. Let me read to you a paragraph from this article from Gritpost. He says the overall narrative of Kaufman's article was that Chenga was playing into the hands of the Russian government in its efforts to exploit divisions in the American public. Kaufman interviewed George Washington University assistant professor Robert Ortung, described by journalist Ben Norton as a, quote, right-wing hawk, for the article, okay, who described Russia's strategy as a, quote, zero-sum game in which activists speaking out about American issues on Sputnik helps the Kremlin, quote, create as much chaos as possible. What that actually means, it's very vague. Okay, but I think that paragraph from Gritpost sums up the gist of the article, in a nutshell. And honestly, I would even more so, I want to direct everybody to the Peach Perspective, peachperspective.com, where Anoa 2 days ago wrote a very good article. I think the title of the article is Biased Reporting by WABE and AJC, Atlanta Journal-Constitution, seek to undermine my voice and demands for accountability in political coverage. If you want to know Anoa's perspective directly, read this article. Don't take my word for anything. Read the article from Anoa herself. Go to her Twitter feed where she's been talking about this for the past few days since this smear campaign started, and just read her perspective, because I have my perspective. If I have my opinion, but this is my opinion. This is my perspective. This is not from Anoa. This is not Anoa saying this. You should listen to her and listen to her voice. Her voice is the most direct voice, and that's the voice that you should be taking in terms of how she feels about the article, and what this article is, what they're trying to do to her and do to her image and do to her credibility, because Anoa has a very large voice in the Black progressive space. And I really feel that this is an attack on all Black progressives. This isn't just an attack on Anoa. This is something that they are trying to use against the Black left in general. Okay, and we have to be very aware of this. And that's why I'm wanting to talk about this today, because I see myself potentially, there's no telling what can be said about me in the future, or anybody, any Black progressive, because this is very reminiscent of McCarthyite tactics from the 50s, making these very vague allusions to Russia, whatever. I don't know if they're trying to Russia collusion, Russia influence, whatever the case may be. Just saying that simply because you went on a program that people claim, okay, is being influenced by the Russian government. And I'm not even going to get into that, because that's some very cloak and daggerish, stuff going on there with what's being said about that particular platform. But just making the illusion or connection that just because somebody did an interview on a platform, then they're somehow pushing a certain line from the Kremlin, that's nonsense. And that's not being said, I don't want to say that's being said directly, it's being said indirectly. Okay? It's being when you run a headline that says Atlanta activist uses Russian-backed media to spread message, okay, your agenda is very clear. You're trying to create a link between Black activists and Black progressives and Russia. A link that's not there. In my opinion, from my perspective, people might have other opinions and other perspectives about that, but people do interviews on all sorts of platforms. People go on the BBC. If I go on the BBC, or if anybody goes on the BBC, are we now pushing British propaganda? No, if you go on anybody's outlet, are you pushing a certain line that that particular outlet espouses? I think no. I think that there are claims that are trying to be made here that are very disingenuous, that reeks of McCarthyism and that reeks of the Red Scare. This is like Red Scare 3.0. Okay, and we have to question the agenda of elites, center left, pseudo liberal platforms, okay, that create this air of uncertainty around issues that black people fight for by using Russia as a vehicle to indirectly question the legitimacy of black movements and black activists. Okay, so now I'm going outside of the article itself. Like I said, I don't want to touch so much on the article itself because there are some things that I want to hear from them first. But and then too, I kind of think maybe I'll try to have a Noah on in the future so we can have a discussion about the article in particular. But I want to talk more so about this this very weird agenda that I'm seeing to link black activist work with Russia. Okay, because if you guys weren't aware, this isn't the first time the NPR has done this. NPR ran a story in October of last year, October of 2017, titled "Russians Targeted U.S. Racial Divisions Long before 2016 and Black Lives Matter." Okay, it's come out that there were certain Twitter accounts that were fake. Okay, but then too, there was a Facebook group. There was a Black Lives Matter Facebook group. I think it was the largest Facebook group, Black Lives Matter Facebook group, that it turned out was run by this white Australian dude. Okay, so it's not just the Russians. It's the ability for anybody who isn't black to manipulate black causes, and this is something that black people and black activists need to be aware of. Okay, and because we shouldn't want this is something that I do want to point out. We shouldn't want any foreign entity. I don't care if it's Russia, Great Britain, whoever, Australian people in Australia. Black movement should be controlled by black people. Okay, and the beliefs of our movements need to be echoed by the black people leading those movements. I think everybody agrees on that. I don't think anybody is in disagreement there with that notion, with that belief. Okay, but what I think is very interesting is how people selectively choose to focus on Russia because it fits a very consistent narrative that the military-industrial complex and the state itself, the American state itself, has been pushing for decades now. Okay, so we shouldn't want to be used by other groups of people who have some sort of geopolitical agenda against the United States government. We don't want to be used as a proxy. That's what I'm trying to say. We do not want to be used as a proxy by anybody. So while we don't want white people in America exploiting our suffering, exploiting our movements for their own agenda, we also don't want foreigners, white or whoever, exploiting black movements here in America against the United States government. And I don't know any black activists that I have talked to, that I have engaged with. I don't know anybody who is actively and intentionally seeking to do that, seeking to be used as a proxy. Because what the impression that I'm getting, and I'm trying to watch my words because this isn't being said directly, okay, by the people pushing this agenda. It's very subtle. Okay, during the COINTELPRO, during the era of COINTELPRO in the 60s, there was a tactic known, and I brought this up when I did my video on BIE, the Black Identity Extremist nonsense that was created last year that reeks of the Trump administration, quite frankly. Okay. Um, there's a COINTELPRO, and I did that video about the BIE. It has like 900 views on my YouTube channel now. Everybody should go watch that video. I want to get it over 1,000 views. But I mentioned something in that video known as bad jacketing. Okay, that was a COINTELPRO tactic that they used to use, whereby they would claim that certain people that they were targeting were affiliated with shady institutions and shady groups of people. This was McCarthyism. This was weaponized McCarthyism. So if you want to sully the reputation or sully the credibility of usually it was a black leftist in the past, just like it's black leftists today, okay, and black movements today. If you want to create an air of uncertainty around those people, you make these very loose, unproven affiliations with them, and you make claims that, these people, they're doing something with the Russians. They're talking on Russian-backed media. Ooh, and you get these very ghost-like accusations that are never proven. Okay, and this was done to a lot of people in the past. W.E.B. Du Bois was accused of being, a Russian bot, or not a bot. They didn't have bots in the 50s. A Russian stooge. They made all sorts of claims. Basically, if you were a black leftist, a black progressive, you might have even been a black socialist or a black democratic socialist. Okay, they just assumed that you were working with the Russian government. Okay, and they did this to destroy people's careers. They did destroy people's careers because of this. And they used this tactic known as bad jacketing, which bad jacketing honestly was to say that certain people were actually agents and things like that when they really weren't. But there was a similar tactic used to say that certain people were in bed with foreign entities. Okay, when that was never really proven conclusively. And they used the media back then to make this argument just the same way that they're using the media now, today, to make these arguments. They're using these elites, center-left, pseudo-liberal, quasi-liberal platforms like these local affiliates and like, NPR and these other established outlets who mainly market towards privileged people in society. Okay, wealthy people in society. That's their target audience. Their target audience is to say, hey, look, white people, you guys should be very careful about engaging with these black activists and with these black leftists, because these guys are going on Russian media and they're working with the Russians, and they're unapologetic about it, and they're calling it a distraction, yada yada yada. So their target audience with this story, this WABE story, their target audience isn't black people. Okay, y'all gotta understand that. Their target audience is really white liberals and rich, established white liberals and white progressives. Why are things popping up on my daggone? What is this? Okay. I was wondering why my feed was slowing down. I'm getting these random pop-ups. Give me 1 second. Okay, it looks like we're good. So yeah, this has been going on for a while now. So what they don't want to tell you, and I want to say this, and then because I'm coming up on the hour mark, so like I said, I'm trying to keep this under an hour. I'm not trying to talk too long today. I might go at an hour, a little over an hour. But what they don't tell you, or what they won't tell you, is how U.S. treatment of black people gets international recognition, and that other governments, both allies and enemies, are aware of America's human rights violations against black people. I personally, this is my, I don't, it's not a conspiracy theory, but this is my thinking, okay, behind why some of these things, not particularly this WABE story, this hack story, this nonsense story, but sort of everything together and sort of combining this incident with similar incidents that have been going on over the past year with this whole Russia phobia nonsense. I get the impression that what the agenda really is to create an air of uncertainty and disconnect. Well, how can I word it? To disconnect black people from. Should I say that? I want to say something and I kind of just stopped because I'm like, I don't know if I should really go there. I'll just say it like this. Okay. People around the world are aware of what's going on to black people in America. And there are relationships, okay, that I get the impression that the state and a lot of the people within the establishment fear can be built of gaining international awareness to black issues. Okay. I've mentioned before how the United Nations is well aware of what's going on to black people in the United States because the United Nations has written on it. They have an entire report calling what happens to black people in America racial terrorism. All right? Or at least not the main Security Council, okay, but an arm of the United Nations released this report. I want to be clear about that. Okay. So I see this whole Russia phobia narrative, this whole this agenda to create this relationship between black activists, or at least in the eyes of the people pushing this argument, create this illusion of a relationship between black activists and black activist movements like Black Lives Matter and things like that with Russia. I see that as an agenda to prevent real bridges being built with actual people who could be allies abroad. And I'm not talking about Russia. I'm talking about people in the UK. I'm talking about people in other parts of Europe. Okay, to create a global awareness of black oppression. Not just in the United States, but around the world. Brazil, Europe, okay, wherever. Canada, wherever. Okay, they do not want that. Okay, they've never wanted that. What was going on a lot of times in the 50s was, well, I'm not even gonna go into. I'm not gonna go into that. That'll take up too much time. I'll save that thought for another video or another live stream. Okay, but they don't want to tell you that international recognition actually gives black movements more credibility. That is very key. And again, I'm not talking about Russia. I'm talking about international recognition in general. Okay, gives black movements more credibility. Okay, their agenda is to create a context by which people believe international recognition is bad. And they're using Russia as a proxy to do that. Now, yes, black people should be, like I said before, we should be mindful of how our movements can be used against us and for agendas that don't have our best interests in mind, and we shouldn't support that. Okay, I want to be clear about that so that people don't put words in my mouth. Okay, but this attempt to smear people by making loose claims of affiliation and attacking people's character because of who they did an interview with is the epitome of what McCarthyism was about. And yes, it is COINTELPRO 2.0. And it's COINTELPRO 2.0 coming from so-called white liberals. One last thing that I find strange about all of this hand-wringing around Russian influence on Americans' opinions is the lack of attention, given by the NPR and some of these other outlets, the lack of attention given to American propaganda, American propaganda against not only other Americans, but against foreigners abroad. I would argue that American propaganda from groups like Cambridge Analytica, which was based in the UK, I understand that, but it was funded by a far-right American billionaire who also helps to bankroll the alt-right. Cambridge Analytica did way more damage to the body politic than Russians, which is why you've seen kind of Cambridge Analytica. It was a big story for like a week, a little over a week maybe. It's kind of faded away now, and they're back to talking about Russia. Y'all see how that happens. They want to keep your attention on Russia. Now, I want to say this, and I've mentioned this in the past, and I'm gonna say this, and then I'm gonna end the stream. I do think that there's a level of collusion. Well, I don't want to use the word collusion there because that's overused. That word is overused. I do think that there's some relationship between the Russian government and the Trump administration. I do. There are way too many links for there not to be any sort of relationship there. I don't know what's going to come out as a result of the Mueller investigation. I have no idea what's going to come out there. I would hope that it wraps up soon because, quite frankly, I'm tired of hearing about it. Regardless of if they find collusion or not, I just want that investigation to end as soon as possible because Trump is doing everything he can to kill that investigation. So I'm not in the camp that thinks Russia is a victim in this whole story. They're definitely not a victim, but at the same time, I don't think that Russia had anything to do with why Donald Trump is in office right now, and I've maintained that. I've said that consistently. I do not think Russia had anything to do with getting Trump elected. Yes, they ran a propaganda campaign. That seems clear. They definitely waged information warfare on the American public and by that standard, the American government. And there might have been some hacking going on as well. But I don't think there's any clear connection between the DNC hacks, for instance, and Trump being elected president. They have yet to really make that argument conclusively. I'll tell you what is conclusive. Well, I shouldn't even say conclusive because it hasn't been proven in court. But I will tell you what is more likely the reason why Donald Trump is in office, and this is the thing that they don't want to talk about. You want to know what the truth of situations is a lot of times. You want to know how you get to the truth of an issue. Look and see what people don't want to talk about. That's usually where you will find more of the truth. What people don't want to talk about is the role that voter suppression. People who have been listening to me for a while are like, oh man, he's on it again. He's bringing up this voter suppression thing again. People don't want to be honest about the role that played in getting Trump elected. It's easier to fearmonger about Russia, even though, like I said, I do think that there's a relationship between Russia and the Trump administration. I definitely think that even going back to his campaign, I do think there's a relationship there. But what they want to divert your attention and distract you away from the real problem at hand, and that's the fact that Americans, these secretaries of state like Chris Kobach, and people like him, ilk like him, spread this agenda known as cross-check to dozens, over 2 dozen states around the country, how voter ID laws that have been passed since 2013 had a major impact on the 2016 election. How the closing of polling stations, over 800 polling stations around the country, made it harder for black and brown people because they were always closed in urban areas, not the white areas. They were closed in the black areas. About how all of this stuff collectively together played a massive role in getting Trump elected. The 2016 election was the first election without the full protections of the Voting Rights Act. Y'all don't think that had an impact in putting him into office? But no, we don't want to talk about that because that implicates Americans. That implicates other Americans. We want to focus your attention on Russia. I have a problem with that. And I know that there are a lot of black progressives who have a problem with that. And we have made no headway in that. Well, I don't want to say that because you have had one positive thing I have seen over the past years. You do have a certain segment of society who has become aware of the threat of voter suppression. And people are talking about it more, but it is not getting nearly the level of attention that it should be getting. But people want to talk about Russia. And people want to use Russia as a vehicle to attack black activists. People who are doing work on the ground, people who are influential in progressive spaces. People care more about that than addressing the issues at hand. I have a very, very huge problem with that. So I'm going to get off my soapbox. I want to have a dialogue about this in the future, definitely. I think this is something that we need to continue to talk about. Because I do not like what is happening right now. And if we don't take on this McCarthyism, this new age McCarthyism, honestly, we're no better than the people who sat around in the 1950s who did nothing back then. People like to think that they're so progressed from the past. As I get older, I see that no, people really aren't as progressed from the past as they like to make themselves out to be. A lot of people think very similar to the way people thought 50 damn years ago. We've just gotten better at sort of hiding our agenda. We've gotten better at that. But people aren't as different from they were in their thinking from the way that they were in the 1950s. So I guess I should say the way their ancestors were in the 1950s. We're not as progressed as we think we are as a society. And quite frankly, we need to stop patting ourselves on the back like we are. So, that's been today's show. I want to definitely talk on this in the future. This is not the end of this story. Trust and believe. You will be hearing more about this whole situation, this rift between white liberals and the black left, or the white left and the black left. There's a very clear rift going on. There's something going on underneath the surface that needs to be talked about, that needs to be addressed. And we're going to continue to call these people out for their shenanigans and for their hit jobs and their hit pieces. All right, so follow my blog at Black and Intellectual. Follow me on Twitter @_BlackIntellect. I will be back next Sunday. I'm not sure if it's going to be an interview or if it's going to be another live stream, but I will let you know ahead of time. And yeah, that's been today's show, and have a nice day, ladies and gentlemen.